Okay, let's see. So yes, so I just, before we get started, I guess, well, maybe I should leave this on the recording. I'm not sure. But to let you guys know that, let's see, there's 5 Sundays in December, and I'm going to be traveling during 2 of them. So what I may do is pre-record something, but still be like in the group, but that way I don't have to be worried about where I am as far as the airport goes and things like that. I have to figure out timing because I'll be in the United States, not next Sunday. Next Sunday I will be here, but the following Sunday I will be between Cleveland and Western Maryland about the time of our class, and then the following Sunday, which I think is the 24th, which shouldn't matter to the people in this group, but I will be flying to Toronto on the 24th and 25th. And that one, I will probably be in the air during the time of the class. So what I may do is either do a Facebook Live, I have to figure out the timing, change the timing of the class, or pre-record something and then just kind of be in with you guys. So we'll have to see how that is. One of those I probably will decide not to do, and the other one I'll pre-record or do something alternative. Also, I discovered, I think, that you can do a Facebook Live and not have it public to everybody, just have it within a group. So I was thinking of maybe trying to do 1 or 2 of those. We'll see, you know, because the Facebook group has some people in it who were paid at a certain time, but not necessarily are now. I may decide to do 1 class every once in a while that everybody can have access to, even if they haven't paid. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, all right. So welcome to Spiritual Mentoring Group. Today is December 3rd, 2017. This week's Parsha is Vayeshev. Vayeshev. And Vayeshev means he dwelt. And it can be found in Bereshit, or Genesis, chapters 37 through 40. In this week's Parsha, we have quite a lot happening. This is the beginning of Joseph's story, Yosef. At the beginning of the Parsha, we're told that he is now 17 years old. Okay. So Joseph is not the worker. He's the philosopher. He's the thinker. He's the one who studies, and he's the dreamer. And the Torah tells us that Yaakov, here named Israel, loved his son Joseph more than all his other sons. Now, if you'll remember from one of our previous classes, I remarked about how I have found a pattern that, you know, Jacob was named Israel after he struggled with the angel and he won. And that name, Israel, represents the overcoming of physical limitations. And so in the Torah, when Jacob is called Jacob, we understand it to be referring to the physical aspects of the nation of Israel. And when it refers to him as Israel, that it's the spiritual aspects of Israel. So in this case, it's not the nation that's being called Israel, it's the person, but still, it says that Israel loved Jacob more than any of the other sons. So this is pointing to the fact that the father and the son had a spiritual connection. There was something there between the two of them that was more than physical. It was a supernatural, spiritual connection. And it was that spirituality that caused him to love his son more than the other sons. Now, if you remember back in the story of Esav and Yaakov, Esav was a hunter. But what was Yaakov? The Torah tells us that Yaakov was content to stay at home among the tents. He was also a man of thought, a bit of a homebody, philosopher. He was a spiritual guy, unlike his brother, who was a man of the field. Esav had to roam. He had to hunt prey. He had excess energy that he always needed to let off. But Yaakov, he stayed at home. He helped his parents. He learned. He was the philosopher. So it only makes sense that his youngest son at that point, Yosef, was very special in his eyes. Not only was he the only son of the only wife he really loved, Rachel, but he was also that thinker and philosopher, a man of faith. So Yaakov could probably see a lot of himself in Yosef. So one day Yosef has a couple of dreams. Now, although he was a philosopher, being young and a tad bit immature, he didn't think out what the consequences would be of his sharing his dreams with his family. So he did. So Joseph tells the first dream in Bereshit chapter 37, verses 7 and 8. And it says, "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the midst of the field. And behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves encircled it and prostrated themselves to my sheaf. So his brothers said to him, will you reign over us? Or will you govern us?" Oh, hang on a second. My notes just like totally flipped out. Okay. So his brothers said to him, will you reign over us or will you govern us? And they continued further to hate him on account of his dreams and on account of his words. Yeah, that may not have been the best choice to tell his brothers, because what did that mean? It was very clear that the 11 sheaves were his brothers, which is interesting because there's 11. So I don't know if that was supposed to also include his sister, or if it was simply a foretelling of the fact that there was going to be one more son, because of course in next week and the week after, we will see Binyamin, who's not been born yet, included in, the whole tribal thing. So anyway, he probably didn't make the best choice in telling his brothers. But then Yosef had another dream. And it says, and again, he again dreamed another dream, and he related it to his brothers. And he said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were prostrating themselves to me. And he told this to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you have dreamed? Will we come, I and your mother and your brothers, to prostrate ourselves to you to the ground? But remember, Jacob was also a thinker. So it says in verse 11, so his brothers envied him, but his father awaited the matter. The Hebrew literally says he guarded it. He may not have liked what Yosef had told over, but he also understood that sometimes God reveals things to those who ponder godly. So Yosef's brothers are jealous of him. They're jealous that he is his father's favorite, and they're jealous that he gets to stay home and learn all day while they work out in the fields shepherding. One day, Yaakov sends Yosef out to check on his brothers who were herding the flocks and to report back to them how the flocks were doing. When we read this story, we kind of, at least I kind of think, oh, so Joseph went on a little walk to go find his brothers. But what we don't realize is that they were 100 kilometers away. For those on the American system, that's like 60 miles. His family was living near Hebron, and the brothers were shepherding the flocks near Shechem. And in the end, it says that Joseph found them in Dotan. So just so that you get an idea of how far we're talking, here's a map of the area, okay? So you see Hebron, right? And then you see, I don't know if you can see kind of along the line between Hebron and Jerusalem, it says Ephrat, right? So the distance by car from Hebron to Ephrat is about 20 minutes, all right, by car. So if you multiply that out, from Hebron to Dotan by car is 2 hours. An hour and a half, I guess, depends on how fast you drive. Although from here to Ofra is about an hour and a half. So yeah, so it's more like 2, maybe even more than 2 hours driving. And they didn't drive back then. They were herding their flocks, which means that they weren't even walking at a fast sprint. So by my calculations, we're talking about a 6-day journey, at least a 6-day journey, 6 days each way. So Yaakov had absolutely no idea what was going on with his sons or his flocks, if everyone was doing well, or if they had been attacked, or what. So that's why he sent his son Joseph to go check on them. He just really had no idea, because it was a 6-day journey. And so yeah, who knows how long they had been gone. Most likely they were gone over 2 weeks, and he was curious what was going on. I mean, for all we know, it could have been months, but how are his kids doing? Are they all right? Do they need anything? Do they need help? Have they been attacked? What's going on? So he sent his son Joseph to go check on them, which, as you can imagine, the brothers did not particularly appreciate. They didn't like him to begin with, but it didn't make things any better that he had come to spy on them for all intents and purposes, and probably to tattle on them as well. So the brothers conspire to kill him. But Reuben, who's the oldest, and Yehuda managed to talk some sense into the rest of the brothers, and the decision is made to sell Joseph into slavery instead of killing him. Jumping ahead just a little bit, Joseph ends up in Egypt, being sold to Pharaoh, or Paro's assistant, Potiphar. Now, Joseph, being a person who is careful in everything that he does, becomes so successful that Potiphar trusts him with everything he owns. Well, one day, Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph, because according to the Torah, Joseph was very good looking. And when she fails, because of course Joseph says, hey, your husband trusts me implicitly. He trusts me with everything in his household. He has given everything in his household to my care, except for you, who are his wife. You are his wife. And he says, would I do this and sin against God? Which is really interesting, because he's making this argument about her husband, and then he says, would I sin against God? So that we could probably do a whole study in all by itself. But anyway, so when Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph and she fails, she frames him for assaulting her, which lands Joseph in prison. While in prison, Joseph proves himself once again and is given a great amount of responsibility. There, he is in charge of Paro's chief cupbearer and chief baker, who have been thrown in prison. The Torah just says that they sinned against their master, whatever that means. They did something that got him angry, and they got thrown into prison. And while in prison, the cupbearer and the chief baker each have a dream. And Joseph interprets the dreams for them, and correctly. And he only makes one request. He asks the cupbearer, because he kind of, in the interpretation of the dream, he told the baker that he was going to die. He was going to be hanged. And the cupbearer, though, was going to be restored to his position. So he asks the cupbearer to remember him and to mention him to Paro, that he might be released from prison. In fact, in this entire account, this is the only thing Joseph says about his situation. He doesn't complain. He just makes the best of a bad situation, always doing his best, even while a slave or in prison. Let me ask you a question. How many of us would do that? I mean, unfairly sold into slavery, unfairly framed and thrown into prison, and instead of complaining, making the best of the situation one finds themselves in? I mean, I have a tremendous amount of faith and trust in Hashem, and yet when I find myself wrongly accused of something, or the victim of Lashon Hara or whatever, I get upset. I get really upset. I cry, I complain, I tell everyone I know that I'm a victim of unfair circumstances. But not Yosef. No, he doesn't say anything. He just does his best, always. So how did he do it? Well, I believe that the key, something that Joseph and King David and some very other special people were keenly aware of, can be found in a line that comes actually from the Haftorah reading that is associated with this reading this week from the prophets that accompanies this week's Torah reading. And it says, in the Haftorah of Vayeshev, hello, come on, thank you, is Amos, chapters 2 and 3 is the Haftorah, but in chapter 3, God is asking a series of questions, the obvious answer being, of which being no. And in verse 6, it says, will there be evil in the city if the Lord has not done it? Wait, what? God doesn't do evil. God is the ultimate definition of what is good in the universe, right? Right. And yet it says that there is no evil if God has not allowed it. So what does this mean? Well, what it means is that many things happen in the world and in our lives that we regard as evil or bad. We look at them and we can't fathom how it could be good in any way. But that's because we see it from a very limited point of view. We don't have the whole picture, and we cannot see what the end result will be of something that seems in the moment to be bad, even evil, right? The lesson that we can learn today from Yosef is the key to success in life. And that is the understanding that we don't understand. And everything, even that which seems evil, works together for our eventual good. I'll give you an example. As it turns out, I mentioned this at the beginning of the class, I am leaving for a speaking tour in the US in a week and a half. Now, I did not originally have plans for this tour, but this summer I got a phone call, not just a message, I got a phone call from a very big rabbi in New York, very big. And he said he wanted to bring me out to speak several places in New York around Hanukkah time. Now, I trusted him at his word, but then he became very difficult to reach. Meanwhile, I got an invitation to speak in Toronto based on the fact that I was coming to the US already, because no one wants to pay airfare for a speaker from Israel. So, you know, I had talked to the rabbi. We didn't have a contract, hadn't signed any agreement yet, but he had said he wanted to bring me out around Hanukkah. So I was trusting that he was going to be bringing me out around Hanukkah and that I would have those speaking events. And so based on that, when the people from Toronto called me and said, will you be in the States in December? And I said, yes. And so we made the arrangements and I signed a contract with the people in Toronto. But that one speaking engagement wasn't enough to even cover my flight from Israel. I needed the other speaking engagements. So now I had this one, and the big rabbi was not returning my messages. So I managed to get one more small event, and Mr. Big Rabbi was completely incommunicado. I have my airfare covered now, but nothing more. And I'm making no money on this event, but I felt that my reputation would be at stake, so I couldn't cancel the other two events. So I decided to talk to my sister and mention that I have a bit of free time if she'd like me to come spend time with her. Because whenever I come on a speaking tour, although usually my tours are a little longer, I try to spend at least a day or two with her, if I can, even a little bit more. But I haven't actually seen her in 2 years. It might have even been 3, because I think the last speaking tour that I had, I didn't have time to see her. So anyway, I asked her if she would like me to come visit and spend some time with her. And so while we're going back and forth about when and all of the details, she tells me that she's been having some kind of a neurological issue for a while and that she was waiting for approval for some MRIs, but she had, over the weekend, had some severe pain, and so she went into the emergency room. And long story short, it turns out that she has an infection around the lymph node under her left ear. And, as it turns out, a brain tumor, a small brain tumor, but still. They found this small brain tumor while doing the CT scan to figure out why she had this pain. So now she's waiting for a brain MRI, and I'm sure she's very scared. So I mentioned to her that actually I have nearly 2 weeks of free time between my first and second speaking engagements, and then my second one and the flight home. And if she'd like, I could maybe rearrange my flights and stuff for me to stay with her the whole time. She's my only sister, and she's all alone in the US because my mom and I are here in Israel. So she was very happy to know that I would be able to spend 2 weeks with her. And I suddenly realized that instead of being upset at this big rabbi and the fact that I have such a paltry speaking tour, I really should be very grateful that Hashem made a way for me to visit my sister when she needs me without having to pay for the ticket. The only cost to me is the 2 speaking engagements. You see how I kind of flipped it on its head? At first, I was so upset that I had all of this extra time in this speaking tour, which doesn't amount to a whole lot, just the 2 small events, and I'm not really making any money on it. And that's what I was focusing on. I'm not making money on this speaking tour. And then I realized that instead of seeing it like I'm not making money on this speaking tour, Hashem provided 2 speaking events just so that I would have my airfare to visit with my sister covered. And by flipping it on its head like that, I realized that something that looked very bad to me turned out to be a huge bracha in disguise, a blessing in disguise. So sometimes things look really bad, and I know you've heard me say this a gazillion times, that sometimes things look really bad, and we need to take a cue from Yosef, that even though things look bad, there's somebody out there who's running things, and he has the big picture, and he knows what's really going on. So next time things are going south, put on your Yosef, all right? So now that's the end of the Torah part of our class today. I'm going to go on to the davening in a minute. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share?
That is just so amazing, is how you can turn something around.
Yeah, and the thing is though we can all do it. It just takes a little exercise. It takes a practice. We have to use that muscle and get it used to doing that. That's one of the reasons, like I said, that I often, we share these Hashgacha Pratit stories on Shabbat afternoon in our home, because when we get in the habit of seeing things that we think of as bad turning out to be good, then even when we can't see how it can be good, we can understand that this is the paradigm, this is the way it is. So now in this case, I saw it, very quickly. We don't always see things very quickly. Sometimes things are bad and we just can't see how they could possibly be good, and we may never see. But in the end, they are. We just have to trust based on God's past track record with us, right? So, yeah, so thank you for that. All right. So now we're going to move on to the Siddur part of our class. I'm just going to take a note. Which really means that we're going to have another short class, and I have to keep apologizing for having short classes. But all right, so last week we started to look at the Shema. We talked about the first paragraph. We talked about how we are being commanded to love, and that love is a choice, not a feeling. Now, keep in mind from previous classes that we say the Shema 4 times a day. And it's not the same in each recitation. What is classically thought of as the 3 paragraphs of the Shema are said later in the morning service. But at this point, this being the first recitation, the one that used to be said at home before coming to shul, the standard 2nd and 3rd paragraph are not said here. Instead, after the first paragraph, we have we continue with a completely different paragraph that says, all right, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you in Hebrew. It's Ata Hu Ad Shelo Nivra. But the English I will read to you. And the English for this paragraph is, you are the one who existed before the world was created. You are the one who exists after the world was created. You are the one who exists in this world, and you are the one who will exist in the world to come. Sanctify your name in your universe. Through your salvation, may you exalt and raise our pride up high and save us soon for the sake of your name. Blessed is he who sanctifies his name among the multitudes. Now, this paragraph is actually very old. This paragraph is actually very old. It's found in ancient Talmudic sources, and it starts by declaring the eternality of God, that he existed before, during, and will exist after this world. When we declare that God is one, we are not only saying that there is only one God and not any other gods, but we're also saying that there is nothing else but godliness, that God is the manifestation, or what we understand as reality is the manifestation of God, that God is one and the same before and after the world was created, and that the creation of the world has not brought about any change in God the Creator. The Tanya explains this, taking teachings from the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, when a human being makes anything, he does not create an entirely new thing, right? He only changes the form of things. That's like the difference between change and transformation. He's using raw materials that are already available. They already exist. Thus, a cabinet maker who makes a piece of furniture uses wood and glue and nails. And once the table or chair are made, they will not fall apart the moment that their maker leaves them alone or steps outside, right? If you make something and then you leave, it continues to exist, because we are not creating something from nothing. We're creating from something that has already existed. We're not actually creating, we're just changing. I mean, it is creating, but it's not the same type of creating that God does. When God made heaven and earth and all that is in them, he had no more raw material available. He created everything out of nothing by simply saying, let there be. That's why it's written, by the word of God, the heavens were created, and the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. That is from Tehillim. Did I write it? Nope. Okay, well, sorry about that. I forgot to put that one in there. So since everything was created out of nothing, being out of non-being, unlike anything which is man-made, which is something out of something already existing before, the heaven and the earth could not exist on their own. They exist only because God constantly makes them exist. If God would turn his attention away from them for a single instant, they would then turn into nothing as before they were created. That's part and parcel with the lesson that I've taught. Again, one of these things that you hear me saying over and over and over and over again, but there's a reason for that. If you see a theme repeating over and over again, then it's because it's an important concept in Judaism that we have to get through our head. In this case, that we exist because God is continuing to speak us into existence. And that means that God feels that the world needs us, and therefore we have value. Now, we can choose to use that value for good or for bad, because God created us with free will, and even people who turn out to be evil, they were created with a purpose as well. God wanted them in the earth for a reason, but then they used their free will to choose to do something which is not good. And so the idea that I like to take from that is this understanding that we have an innate value, and that we would not have, if we didn't have any value, we would cease to exist. And the fact that we still exist means that God values our presence in this world and that we still have a purpose and something to do, even at an old age. And I think I've mentioned this a gazillion times before as well. One day I had a coaching client, and she objected to this point that I was making, and she asked me, what about a girl with a child, let's say, that has cerebral palsy or something, where they're in a wheelchair, they can't talk, they can't do anything for themselves, where's their value? And I shared that I mean, this is just my perspective, I don't know for sure if this is how God sees it, but all of the people that are doing things for her, she is a conduit, she is a vessel, a kli for all of those mitzvot. If she didn't exist, then those people wouldn't have the opportunity to do the mitzvot that they do in helping her to accomplish the things that they help her to do, whether it's feeding her, whether it's pushing her in the wheelchair, or whatever other things that they do. They're doing these good deeds which are necessary for them to fulfill their purpose in the world. And her purpose in the world is in facilitating other people doing their purpose in the world. So like, for example, if I told you that I know a coach who helps people find their purpose for life and helps them to achieve the purpose for which they were created, and then I said, is that person a valuable person? Everybody would say, of course, what a fantastic job to facilitate other people accomplishing what they were created to accomplish in this world. And yet, this same little girl who is helpless is doing exactly the same thing. And we don't see it. We see simply that she is helpless. But in reality, she is a conduit. She is a vessel that Hashem is using in order to help everybody around her to do what they need to do in order to fulfill their purpose in this world. And so if we exist for a reason, and we have an innate value. And so, you know, a lot of times we're so down on ourselves and we're so hard on ourselves, and sometimes we feel just worthless. And we need to stop and realize that if we really were worthless, we wouldn't exist, right? God saw fit to keep us in existence because we have worth and we have value and we have a purpose on this earth. So the Baal Shem Tov, who lived from 1698 to 1760, he said, "It is written, forever, O God, your word is fixed in the heaven," which, like I said, is from Tehillim 119, verse 89. The word of God, let there be a firmament, is always there in heaven, and this is what makes the heavens exist. If God should withdraw his word, the heavens would be no more, for there is nothing else to keep them in existence. Our physical eyes see only physical things, material things. If our eyes could see spiritual things, we would not see the things we see now, tables, chairs, trees, flowers, whatever. Instead, we would see only their real being. That is the word of God, which creates and sustains everything from nothing. And I would just add to that, that if we could see for a moment what God sees in people, the way that we would treat other people would be very different from the way that we treat them, generally speaking. And so one of the goals that we need to have in life is to try to see the God spark, the godly spark in each person. And even when we see someone who is annoying or is whatever they are, to stop and say, okay, God sees value in this person. This person is unique and special and created by God. And if we could simply see that person and their soul and the godly spark that's within them, we would treat people very differently. And of course, if everybody could do that, the entire world would be different. So that's what I have to share with you today. Virginia, if you would like to unmute and we can talk or whatever, because again, we have a 40-minute class. I have to figure out how to make the classes longer. I should have added another paragraph to it, but I didn't. So is there anything that you would like to share?
You know, I think it's however long the class is irrelevant. Now, if it's 40 minutes or 45 minutes, that's great. As long as, you know, um, it is beneficial and we are learning and receiving something new. So don't worry about it, really. I know you're thinking probably it should be an hour.
Yeah.
But, you know, if it's not, as long as the main points are across and understood.
Thank you. Thank you for that encouragement, really. But I feel like I want to give everybody their value, you know, and so I feel
But it is value. Well, to me it is, put it
okay.
that way. Because, you know, there comes a time when the full stop is there, if you know what I mean. You know, you've said it,
Right.
it's been understood and received, and it's food for thought, and maybe a bit longer would
Be
be
too much.
lost somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it would be too much. All right. Great. So thank you for that encouragement. I really appreciate it. You know, any other insights? I think that there's just so much when we read the story of Yosef and how
Mm,
he handled what really was horrible circumstances, very unfair. And I'm sure that being in prison back then was not all of the you know, posh accommodations that prisoners in most Western societies have today. You know, we have
mm,
an idea of treating people humanely. I don't think that they had that back then in Egypt. But anyway, so there's a lot we can learn about that, and about being grateful for how good we really do have it, and stopping and recognizing that when things happen that are unpleasant or whatever, that really the one who runs the world knows that this is what needs to happen in order for us to accomplish what we were created to accomplish. And so sometimes we just have to stop and say, okay, what can I learn from this? You know, and if I can't find anything to learn from it, then I just need to do my best in the circumstances that I'm in, and hopefully I'll figure out what I'm supposed to do from some other point, you know. But
mm.
yeah, so
Yeah, I've always found the story of Joseph to be one of great encouragement, because, you know, there was somebody who did what was right and was betrayed because of it. And in this world today, if you can just think of what's happening in the UK at this minute, you know, the truth is becoming hated,
hmm,
and a lie is becoming the new truth.
right.
And, you know, so we've all faced this. We've all faced some sort of backlash for doing the right thing that we know is the right thing.
Right.
And we've all been betrayed, or you know, by those that we would consider closer than a brother. And here is a person that was quite, but, you know, he didn't wring his hands and moan and,
Right.
oh, why me and why me and poor me. You know, and he didn't blow his own trumpet about how good he was, and, you know,
Right.
um, I just, oh, you know, it's
I think that there's a big
makes them.
contrast too between the story of Joseph and the story, for example, of Job, right?
Mhm,
Because like Joseph, he didn't mourn his situation, at least as far as we know from the Torah. He
mhm,
said, okay, well, there's not much I can do about the situation I'm in, so how can I make the best of what I've got? And I'll
mhm,
just be myself and do my best, whatever circumstances are thrown my way. And you know, hopefully God will provide a venue for me to get out of this situation, because I certainly don't like it. And that's something, when I mentioned hearkening back to King David, you know, David says, God, you're in charge, you know everything, and you chose to put me in these circumstances. I probably deserve far worse, but please make it stop. You know, like
mhm,
there's nothing wrong with asking for relief, but like Joseph, even in the midst of that, we should still be doing our best and trying to make the best out of whatever we've got. Like the old saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? Do what you can with what you've got, and hope, God will take care of the rest.
Yeah. No, it's a great inspirational story. I mean, all of them are. The account of Joseph, and Job, and all of them are just like such inspirational stories.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, how do I apply it to my life today? Because, like I said, most of everybody almost has been let down, has been backstabbed, has been castigated for doing the right thing or saying the right thing, or just everybody has had that. Everyone's had a close friend that you consider a brother let you down in the most dreadful way. I mean, who hasn't had that?
Right.
What is our attitude? What is our how do we react to it?
Right. That's the question.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge for me.
Sure.
Not that I have anything like that, but recently I did have a bit of a problem like that I had to sort out. But it's just a matter of just saying, well, look, it is out of my hands. How can how can I carry on with this?
Exactly. Where do I go from here? What am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
And he didn't give up. He could have. He didn't. He did what was right, and he kept going forward. And in the end, of course, what we'll see in the next couple of weeks is that it paid off, and he eventually was able to see, because of course the famous quote from Joseph is, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." And that's the phrase. It's not in this week's parsha, but that's the phrase that we have to keep in mind, that whatever this person intends for evil, God will make it for good. We don't necessarily know how it's going to work out, but God will make it for good.
Yeah.
And on that note, I
Amen.
want to wish everybody a fantastic week. Thank you for joining me live, Virginia. For everybody who's joining me not live, I hope to see you next week. And everybody stay warm. For those in the northern hemisphere, I guess stay cool if you're in the southern hemisphere. And everybody have an amazing week. Please chime in on the Facebook group, and let's keep this community going, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.